At 2:28 in the morning, in the Catalina Foothills north of Tucson, Arizona, the desert is so dark you cannot see your hand in front of your face. There are no streetlights out here. The homes sit on acre lots, separated by saguaro cactus and cholla, and prickly pear. The kind of terrain that will shred your skin if you walk through it without knowing the path. The nearest neighbor might be 100 yards away. If you screamed, they wouldn't hear you. Nancy Guthrie had lived in this landscape for years. She knew the silence. She knew the dark. And on this night, somewhere inside her home, on a quiet foothills street, a pacemaker that had been faithfully transmitting cardiac data to her phone suddenly stopped. 2:28 a.m. The digital record of Nancy Guthrie's heartbeat simply ends. No alarm was triggered. No 911 call was placed. No neighbor's dog barked loud enough for anyone to notice. And exactly 8 minutes later, at 2:36 a.m., a Ring camera mounted on a house 2.5 miles down a back road captured a vehicle driving away from the direction of Nancy's home. The road it was on avoids every main highway. Locals say it's the route you'd take if you were trying to leave this neighborhood without being seen. 8 minutes, 2.5 miles, and Nancy Guthrie was gone. This is the story of what happened inside that house before the clock started, and why, out of 27 days later, the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Office, and $1 million reward still haven't brought her home. Before I take you inside that house, before we reconstruct what the evidence tells us happened in those final minutes, I need you to understand something that almost every news report about this case gets wrong. They tell you about the crime. They tell you about the investigation. They tell you about the sheriff's mistakes and the FBI's resources and the ransom demand. They don't tell you about Nancy. And until you understand who Nancy Guthrie was, you can't understand what was taken from her or why the way she lived made her vulnerable to the exact crime that found her. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lived alone in the Catalina Foothills, a community that sits in the shadow of the Santa Catalina Mountains on the northern edge of Tucson. The foothills are beautiful, dramatic desert landscape, million-dollar views, the kind of sunsets that make people move across the country. But the foothills are also isolated. These aren't suburban subdivisions with cul-de-sacs and neighborhood watch signs. These are large-lot desert properties where the architecture is designed to blend into the landscape rather than stand out from it. Homes are set back from roads. Fences are low or non-existent. Half of many properties are open to the desert unfenced acreage that flows from one parcel to the next. A retired law enforcement officer who worked this specific area for nearly 3 decades told us something that reframes this entire case. These foothills neighborhoods are and have been for years notorious for burglary. And the way burglars operate out here is unlike anything you'd see in a city. Because out here, the desert itself is the escape route. In the Catalina Foothills, burglaries follow a pattern. They aren't smash-and-grab operations. They're planned. Burglars case properties in advance, sometimes visiting days or weeks before the actual crime. They study routines. They identify soft targets, homes that are occupied by people who live alone, who are elderly, who don't have dogs or security systems that would create immediate complications. And they don't come alone. Typically, one person enters the home. A second person, sometimes a third, serves as the lookout and getaway driver, positioned on a different road, sometimes a mile or more away. The entry person walks through the desert on foot, navigating between properties in the dark, approaching from the back of the target home where there are no cameras and no line of sight from the road. When they're done, they walk back out the same way through the desert, past the cholla and the prickly pear, to a vehicle waiting on another road entirely. If you're looking at the front door for how they got in, you're looking in the wrong place. Now, here's what makes the Nancy Guthrie case different from a standard foothills burglary. And it's a difference that changes everything about what likely happened that night. About a week before Nancy disappeared, a surveillance camera captured an image of a person at her front door. The figure appeared to be male. And in this first image from this earlier visit, there was no weapon visible. But on the night Nancy vanished, a second image was captured. Same door, same posture. But this time, there was a gun tucked into the waistband. A standard burglar doesn't come back to the same house. A standard burglar doesn't carry a weapon, because a weapon turns a burglary charge into armed robbery. And if anyone gets hurt, it becomes something far worse. Someone came to Nancy Guthrie's door once to look, and then came back prepared for what he might have to do. Nancy Guthrie was asleep in her own home. She had a pacemaker that tracked her heart rate. She had a phone by her bed. She had a Ring camera on her door. She had every reason to believe she was safe. And somewhere in the desert darkness, someone was already walking toward her back door. I want to walk you through what we believe happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home on that night. And I want to be very clear about something. What follows is a reconstruction based on the physical evidence that has been made public, the forensic timeline established by the pacemaker data, and the analysis of law enforcement professionals with decades of experience in this specific type of crime in this specific area. We don't know exactly what happened, and only the people who were inside that house know that. But the evidence paints a picture, and the picture is this. At some point in the early morning hours, before 2:28 a.m., someone entered Nancy Guthrie's home. Based on burglary patterns in the Catalina Foothills, the most likely entry method was through the rear of the property, the unfenced portion that backs up to open desert. The person would have been dropped off on the road to the south, then walked north through the desert terrain, moving between properties in near total darkness. If you've never walked through the Sonoran Desert at night, it's almost impossible to convey how hostile the environment is. Cholla cactus, what locals call jumping cholla, will attach to you if you brush against it. Prickly pear can shred exposed skin. The ground is uneven, rocky, studded with thorns. But a motivated burglar will walk through it barefoot if they have to. Other law enforcement in Pima County has documented exactly that suspects running through prickly pear patches without shoes to avoid arrest. The will of someone committed to a crime should never be underestimated. The entry into the house itself may have been quiet. These foothills homes often have sliding glass doors or rear entries that are less secured than the front. What matters isn't how the person got in. What matters is what happened when Nancy Guthrie realized she wasn't alone. Because for a burglar, that moment, the moment of detection, is where everything changes. And the decision made in the next few seconds determines whether this is a property crime or something else entirely. A retired Pima County K-9 unit supervisor and SWAT veteran who spent 29 years working this exact area laid out the decision tree that a burglar faces when confronted by a homeowner. And it is as simple as it is devastating. Option 1. Run. Flee the house. Sprint through the desert. Hope you can reach your driver before the homeowner calls 911. The problem? Your car isn't in the driveway. It's a mile or more down the road. If Nancy picks up the phone, deputies could be on scene in minutes. Motion detectors on neighboring properties will light up. Dogs will bark. The window for escape closes fast. Option 2. Ensure the witness can't call. Most burglars run. That's the statistical reality. A confrontation is bad for business. But most burglars don't bring a gun on the second visit to a house they've already cased. Here's what we know about the physical evidence. There was blood on the front patio, outside the front door. It has been attributed to Nancy Guthrie. That blood tells us several things. It tells us there was a physical event, a struggle, an injury, something that broke the skin. It tells us that at least part of whatever happened moved toward the front of the house. And it tells us that Nancy was not taken without resistance. A former law enforcement officer put it this way: if there was a struggle, and the intruder's skin was broken a scratch, contact with Nancy's fingernails, then there is now a DNA transfer, Nancy's hands, her fingernails. Her clothing become evidence. Nancy herself becomes evidence. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from her phone. The most likely explanation for that disconnection is that the phone was destroyed, moved out of Bluetooth range, or that Nancy herself was moved away from the device. Pacemakers transmit via short-range Bluetooth. If the wearer moves more than approximately 30 feet from the paired phone, the connection drops. So at 2:28 a.m., either Nancy's phone stopped working, or Nancy was no longer near it. Either way, whatever happened inside that house was over, and the clock to the Ring camera 2.5 miles away started ticking. 8 minutes. That's the gap between the pacemaker disconnection at 2:28 a.m. and the vehicle captured on the Ring camera at 2:36 a.m., 2.5 miles south of Nancy Guthrie's home on a road that avoids every main highway. The drive time between Nancy's house and that camera location? Approximately 8 minutes at normal speed on that specific route. Now, and I need to be precise, here we don't know that Nancy was in that vehicle, but someone was. And they were leaving from the direction of her home, on the route a local would take to avoid detection, at the exact time the math says they would be there. A journalist, not law enforcement, found that Ring camera footage. A reporter canvassing the area, doing the work of checking doorbells 2.5 miles from the crime scene. The video existed on a neighbor's device for weeks before anyone thought to look for it. And that fact alone tells you something about the investigation. So 3 weeks, the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, every detective in the county reassigned to this case. And it took a reporter to find the most significant piece of surveillance footage in the entire investigation. But the car is only part of the vanishing. There's another element to this case that has confounded investigators, generated global speculation, and may or may not have anything to do with what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The ransom. Shortly after Nancy's disappearance became public, a ransom demand was made. $250,000 in Bitcoin, sent to a cryptocurrency wallet, and almost immediately something about the ransom didn't add up. There was no proof of life. No photo of Nancy alive and in captivity. No phone call, no video, no verifiable sign that the person demanding money had any connection to the person who took her. The payment mechanism was vague. The communication was impersonal. It read less like a kidnapper's demand, and more like someone who saw an opportunity and reached for it. This creates two distinct possibilities, and they lead to radically different conclusions about what happened. Possibility 1. The ransom is real. Nancy was taken alive for the purpose of extracting money. The perpetrators are holding her somewhere, maintaining her, feeding her, giving her medication. In this scenario, Nancy may still be alive, and the silence from her captors is strategic. Possibility 2. The ransom is a ruse. Nancy was taken, or killed, during a burglary gone wrong, and the ransom demand was sent by someone else entirely. Someone sophisticated enough to exploit a high-profile disappearance. Someone who had nothing to do with what happened at that house. The retired Pima County veteran we spoke with was blunt. He doesn't believe the person fumbling at Nancy's front door with shrubbery trying to cover the Ring camera is the same person who created an untraceable Bitcoin ransom demand. The skill sets don't match. The sophistication gap is too wide, which means there may be two separate crimes orbiting the same victim, the physical crime at the house and the digital crime exploiting the aftermath. And investigators may be chasing shadows on one while the other goes cold. There's one more piece of this puzzle, and it may be the most troubling. $1 million reward has been offered for information leading to Nancy's recovery. $1 million. And in 27 days, no one has come forward. In the world of street-level crime, people turn on each other for a fraction of that. A veteran officer told us that burglars, the kind who operate in these neighborhoods, would typically sell out an accomplice for $50,000. For $1 million? The only reason no one has talked is because the people involved believe they'd face consequences worse than poverty. Under Arizona's felony murder rule, every participant in a felony during which a death occurs can be charged with murder, regardless of who pulled the trigger or whether anyone intended to kill. The lookout gets the same charge as the person who entered the home. If Nancy Guthrie is dead, silence isn't loyalty, it's survival. I need to talk about the investigation now, and I need to do it carefully because there are people in the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI who are working this case with everything they have. Good people, competent people, people who want nothing more than to bring Nancy Guthrie home. But the investigation has been marked by a series of decisions that have, at minimum, complicated the search and at worst may have destroyed evidence that could have solved this case. And the first mistake happened in the first hours when the most critical decisions were being made. The crime scene at Nancy's home was released too quickly. In the aftermath of the initial response, 12 to 14 latex gloves discarded by law enforcement personnel, evidence technicians, or Border Patrol agents who responded were found scattered in the desert around the property. Gloves that should have been collected and disposed of properly. Gloves that now had to be collected as potential evidence. Wasting investigative hours determining whether they were from responders or perpetrators. A veteran officer called it what it was, unprofessional, because every one of those gloves represents a potential contamination event. Every one required lab time to exclude, and every hour spent processing discarded responder equipment is an hour not spent processing actual criminal evidence. Then there's the search, or rather, the search that wasn't. Pima County has one of the top-rated search and rescue units in the state of Arizona by some metrics. The best in the entire country, averaging 225 missions per year or so here. Their methodology is precise. Segment the search area into defined grids, allocate resources to each grid, maintain critical spacing between searchers so nothing is missed, document every parcel checked and every parcel that needs a return visit. This methodology was not fully deployed in the Guthrie case. Instead, what sources describe as a reactive search pattern, searching in response to tips and leads rather than systematically sweeping the surrounding area. The result? 27 days in, there are swaths of desert within a few miles of Nancy's home that have never been properly searched. And that surveillance video found by a reporter at a house 2.5 miles away? If systematic canvassing had been conducted in the first week, it would have been found by investigators. Instead, it sat on a doorbell camera for 3 weeks while detectives focused elsewhere. The resource picture tells its own story. On day 27, the Pima County Sheriff's Office issued a statement. The department is refocusing resources to detectives specifically assigned to this case. As leads are developed and resolved, resource allocation may fluctuate. Translation: the full department response is over. The FBI has pulled most of its agents back to the Phoenix field office. Specific detectives will continue working the case. But the all-hands approach that a case this serious demands is being scaled back. And this is where the institutional dynamics become relevant. A former officer described the tension inside the department frustration from deputies who feel the negative media coverage reflects on all of them, not just the decision-makers. The sheriff has acknowledged mistakes, including the early scene release, but acknowledgement doesn't recover lost evidence. There's also the jurisdictional question that has haunted this case from the beginning. Some detectives privately believe the FBI should have taken full lead from day 2. The FBI has the resources, the technology, the manpower to maintain a sustained investigation. A county sheriff's department, no matter how capable, doesn't have the infrastructure to keep every detective on one case for a month while other crimes pile up. But ego, professional pride, and the genuine desire to solve your own community's cases created an environment where the handoff never fully happened. The FBI assists, the sheriff leads, and 27 days later, neither has found Nancy Guthrie. 27 days ago, Nancy Guthrie was asleep in her own home. She had a pacemaker that tracked every beat of her heart. She had a Ring camera that recorded every visitor to her front door. She had neighbors who cared about her safety. She had a sheriff's department that patrolled her neighborhood. She had an FBI field office 2 hours up the highway. None of it was enough. Because the truth about the Catalina Foothills, the truth that real estate agents don't mention and that neighbors don't talk about at block parties, is that this landscape has been a theater for property crime for decades. Burglaries in these neighborhoods are not rare. They are recurring. And they follow patterns that law enforcement has documented for years. Casing visits, nighttime entry from the desert, multi-person crews, escape routes that avoid every major road. Nancy Guthrie was not chosen at random. Someone studied her home. Someone came to her door to look, and then came back with a gun. Someone knew the terrain, knew the darkness, knew the routes out, and someone else, maybe the same person, maybe not, saw an opportunity in the chaos that followed and sent a ransom demand to a family that was already in agony. Here's what the evidence suggests, and I want to be forthright with you because that's what Gravel Ghost Basement does. Nancy Guthrie's family has publicly said what investigators have likely been thinking for weeks. They do not believe Nancy is still alive. The logic is merciless. If this was a burglary gone wrong, if Nancy was detected, if there was a struggle, if her blood ended up on the front patio, then the person who entered her home had a choice. Run and leave a living witness who will call 911 before you reach your car. Or take the witness with you, because now she is the evidence. If they took her to prevent identification. And a person taken for that reason is not a person being kept alive. I hope that analysis is wrong. The family hopes it's wrong. The officers working this case hope it's wrong. But hope doesn't find missing people. Evidence does. And right now. Well, the evidence says Nancy Guthrie disappeared in the space of 8 minutes into a desert that hasn't been properly searched, through an investigation that stumbled in its first hours, pursued by agencies that couldn't agree on who should lead. At Gravel Ghost Basement, we tell stories the victims can't say themselves. Nancy Guthrie can't tell you what happened at 2:28 a.m., but her pacemaker left a timestamp. A Ring camera 2.5 miles away left another. And somewhere between those two data points in 8 minutes, in the dark, in the desert, the answer to this case exists. We're going to keep following it. If you know something, anything about what happened to Nancy Guthrie, the FBI tip line is active. The reward is $1 million. And whoever is staying silent right now should understand. Secrets have a shelf life. Accomplices turn. Evidence surfaces. And the desert eventually gives up what it's been hiding. If this story matters to you, if Nancy's story matters to you, share this video. Not for our channel, for the chance that it reaches the one person who knows something and hasn't said it yet. Subscribe to Gravel Ghost Basement and hit the bell so you're here when we update this case. And tell me in the comments, what do you think happened in those 8 minutes? The story belongs to the people who can't tell it themselves. We'll see you in the next one.